Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to ask you guys a question of why is it that people believe, in light of everything that you see, why is it that people believe that professional bodybuilders actually know a lot about arm training or how to get their arms to grow? And I want people to ponder that for a moment while I put on my +5 head of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because there's something vastly different today in the whole pro bodybuilding world than there was like back during the golden era of bodybuilding, or even the 50s or 60s. It's something I want people to think about when they ask this question. And I'm not using myself as an example here, because a lot of people are going to be like, well, why are you talking about bodybuilding? You don't look like a bodybuilder. Because I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not interested in bodybuilding, but a lot of people are, and a lot of people take advice from professional bodybuilders, and I think that's oftentimes a very, very bad idea. But here's the thing. When you ask around, and really ask around, if you don't believe me, ask people who are friends with pro bodybuilders. Ask Mark Lobliner. You know what? Ask Mark Lobliner. Ask Jerry Ward. Even people who don't get along with me, they're going to agree on this. If you go ask them blatantly, do the majority of professional bodybuilders, and even amateurs in the NPC, do most of them use site enhancement in their arms and delts? Do the majority of them? They will tell you yes. They will tell you yes. In fact, I've heard Mark say that certain coaches are known for being absolute artists with synthol, being absolute artists at it. The majority of them use site enhancement. It is the norm. It's not the exception to the rule. You go look at the top 10 guys at the Mr. Olympia, at least 9 out of 10 of the guys up there, if not all 10 out of 10, are putting something directly into their biceps, triceps, delts. All right? Yet people are convinced they know a lot about arm training. Now, what do they put in there? Well, sometimes it's synthol. Sometimes it's directly injecting their anabolics in there. There can be a host of different things going on. There's even collagen, there's implants, there's all sorts of stuff. But usually just directly pinning oils of some type into there, and it builds up scar tissue over time, is the norm. It's the norm among these guys. All right? The majority of them do it, the overwhelming majority. Now here's my question. Most of these guys are on absurd amounts of anabolics. I think most of us understand that at this point. It's pretty well understood. If there's even one magazine even that's been dedicated to it that admits all of that, Muscular Development, they have tons of former top pros and everything on there who talk about this stuff in detail. All right, it's pretty universally accepted that most of them use doses of anabolics the average person, even who dabbles in the stuff, would consider to be pretty excessive. We've seen Rich Piana. We've seen Boston Lloyd admit what they use, and both of them are on the high end. Now, some people say Rich, it really isn't. Both of these guys use site enhancement also. Yet you go back and look at different eras. Go look at Larry Scott, Bill Pearl, Steve Reeves, Reg Park. Go look at some of these guys from a previous era. They didn't really have injectable anabolics. All they had was orals. There was nothing for them to pin in their arms. None of them had ever taken a needle to their bicep or tricep. They didn't have implants. Why did these guys all have great arms? But the guys today have to put stuff in there to be proportionate, who are on excessive amounts of anabolics. All right, so that being said, why isn't their training good enough to get them there? And look at the difference between the way those guys trained back then versus how they train now, and tell me that the modern guys really know what they're doing. Because all the modern guys, they all trained pretty similar. They all have a chest day, they all have an arm day, they all have a back day, they have body part split days, a leg day. All right, no one trained like that back in that era. All these guys today, what do they focus on? A pump, high reps, lots of volume, a wide variety of exercises. How did the guys train back then? Mostly full body workouts. Some of them occasionally split things up, but mostly full body. A focus on getting stronger on the big compound movements, and maybe 1 or 2 isolation movements to bring up things that they needed. Like if you go look how a lot of these guys train, how they build their arms, bench press, overhead press, dips, chin-ups, rows. They got as strong as possible in them, and then they might have a favorite bicep or tricep exercise. They didn't come in and do 5 different bicep exercises. I mean, look at Stuff like Steve Reeves or even Bill Pearl, they were big on the incline curl. That's what they built their biceps with, that and doing lots of pulling work. Bill Pearl was extremely strong on presses, weighted dips. He had big, massive triceps. He would play around with a little bit of kickbacks every now and then. He didn't have like 4 different tricep movements, but he got very, very, very strong on the basics. And most of these guys trained every muscle or every lift they cared about 2 or 3 times a week and focused on getting stronger. They all had impressive arms while doing only specific isolation movements. Stuff that maybe got like a deeper stretch or something in the muscle, like an incline curl. Perfect example. If you wanted a really big bicep and you got as strong as you possibly could on weighted chin-ups, and then you would maybe finish your bicep off with a deep stretch on an incline curl, which gets a stretch reflex, telling me you couldn't build the biggest bicep you possibly would genetically be able to get to if you focused on those too heavily. Use the incline curls to maybe finish the muscle off a little bit after doing heavy chin-ups, heavy barbell rows. That would build you the biggest biceps you could get. These guys today, they come in and here's proof that they don't know anything about training. It's like Bill Starr used to always say. He was quoted for saying that as a football coach. He would say, I wouldn't trust the average professional bodybuilder to coach a high school football team in the locker room, in the weight room, that they're not qualified to do it. All right. Here's an example. You'll see these guys talking about, well, I hit the bicep from different angles. The bicep doesn't have different angles. The bicep is one of the most simple muscles in the body. This is what it does. That's it. That's all the bicep does. Do you honestly think, I mean, looking at the anatomy, everything else, do you really think you can train the lower or upper bicep? You really think there's that much such a thing as inner or outer bicep? There's brachialis under there a little bit. That can be hit slightly differently. But really, when you look at the function of the muscle, in what world does anyone believe that it has 4 or 5 different angles? Bodybuilders just throw everything at the kitchen sink but a muscle and just hope it works. And just hope it works. Let me just throw as many different exercises as I can for a bunch of reps and sets and hope it works. And now they do this while on drug stacks that, quite frankly, they would get big if they just did jumping jacks. And yet they still all have to side enhance. It's funny. I remember Greg Valentino, for those not familiar with him, many years ago he was in a documentary called The Man Whose Arm Exploded. Obviously he's a synthol freak now. And it's because of his own bigorexia and body image disorder, and he admits that. He admits that that's what caused him to do that, to be that freakish. And he kind of would say, you really think I wanted to be this freakish? You think I wanted to do this to myself? I couldn't help it. So he knows that he's got an issue there, but interestingly enough, the guy actually was considered to be a fairly successful bodybuilder before he turned himself into kind of the synthol freak with so much fake muscle on him. And I remember in an interview with him talking about some of that, they were like, well, when you were, younger, like, what's your favorite bicep exercise? And he's like, the one that brings the hand closest to the face. He's like, what do you, the bicep's not complicated. Do you really think bicep training is that complicated? Yet these guys make it out to be. All these pro guys make this bicep training out to be something that it isn't, and yet then all of them follow all these really complex things. If I need 5 different exercises for a bicep or 5 different exercises for a tricep, while on tons of drugs, and then what do? They all go inject oil into those muscles because they're still not big enough. But then you go back and you look, how did these guys train way back in the day who all actually had really good arms? They all had good arm development. They focused on strength. They got really strong at the big compound movements. Now, I don't necessarily mean 1 rep maxes, although a lot of them did that. They got strong at doing 5 rep sets, strong at doing 8 rep sets, strong at doing 10 rep sets, doing them frequently. Keep in mind, a lot of these guys bench pressed, overhead pressed, did chin-ups, rows 3 times a week. They got strong on the big exercises. And then they finished the muscle off with one efficient movement. They found one exercise that would get a little deeper into that muscle than what they were getting, and they would work on that afterwards. And you know what? That worked. That worked. That really isn't that complicated. Yet it seemed to have worked better for them than the guys today, because these guys managed to keep arms that were proportionate to their torsos, right? They kept arms proportionate to their torsos without putting a needle in there. And so that's the thing. When you see bodybuilders today, who that's really the methods they use, look at their methods. And people say, but they know what they're talking about. Look how big they are. Yeah, most of them are genetically gifted. Most of them are on almost enough drugs to kill an elephant. And they all inject oil into their muscles on top of it, because they're still not big enough with the way they train. And how do they train? They just throw everything but the kitchen sink at a muscle. And that is the description I've heard many coaches describe modern bodybuilding training. They just pick a muscle group and throw everything they can find at it and hope something works. That's their strategy. And that's now the tradition that most of them utilize. None of them really do anything that different. And let's keep in mind, what research have we seen on drugs and even people who don't lift? People gain up to 18 pounds of muscle. Normal, healthy people in studies have gained 18 pounds of muscle when they stop exercising. They go on moderate amounts of these substances. And yet these guys use sometimes 5, 6, 10 times the amount that's ever been used in a study. They don't have a plan where most of them train. They just come in, I'm just training arms today, I'm training chest today, and they just do everything. They have no concept of training programming, nothing that a professional coach who has a degree, who works with real athletes would use, even if they wanted to bulk their guys up in the off season, which there are whole protocols for that used in sports science to work with world level athletes with $5 million contracts. There are protocols used to bulk them up when they need them to come up a weight class without gaining fat. That is part of exercise science. And $5 million contract and $20 million contract athletes have coaches who know how to do that. It doesn't look anything like what these bodybuilders do. And yet people still look at that and assume, well, they must know what they're talking about. They must know how to build muscle in the gym. Do they really? Do they? Are you sure about that? Or are they just genetically gifted, use mind-boggling amounts of drugs, throw whatever exercises they can come up with that day at a body part, and hope that they stimulate enough growth? And then if they don't, just to be sure, they inject a bunch of stuff into that muscle to make it swell up and build scar tissue inside it, just in case. You really sure that's who you want to take your training advice from? Look how many health problems these guys have. You sure they know what they're doing? I don't think so. But you know what? People are free to do what they want. They're free to do what they want. If they want to listen to these guys, that's their business. That's their right. What I might tell people to ask that question. If these guys really knew so much about training something like the biceps or the triceps, if they knew that much about it, why, after all the training they do, all the insane amounts of drugs that they use, they still have to inject stuff into those muscles to make them bigger? Why? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.